Good evening and welcome back. We're so glad to have you back with us because we have another exciting show for you this evening. And we're so glad you're there, but like I tell you every show, be sure to have pencil, paper, and be ready to take down information, write down contact information, because I have such exciting guests all the time. And this is no exception. Today for my guests, I have Laura Debbingham, and she's going to tell you a lot about what she does, and I think you're going to be very interested in this. So Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so glad to have you here because I've listened to you talk about some of the things that you do, and I said the audience needs to know more about this. This is what it's all about.
It's the best kept secret in rural Nevada. That's what I say.
And that's what we want. So before we even get into a lot of other things, I want to let you know, too, that Laura is a social work instructor. So she's going to tell you a lot about social work, but you need to hear it from her. So tell us, how did you get into this? Give us some of your background.
Well, I always say that the best social workers are those that have a pretty interesting background, shall we say.
Okay.
In fact, I think that the best social workers are those who've had trauma in some way in their background. So
Wow.
maybe a traumatic childhood, if they've had some experiences in which there's been, some kind of abuse or that kind of thing. Those actually make great social workers. And I come from a background of a fairly dysfunctional family. I always, at family reunions, we say we put the fun in dysfunctional. And we're pretty open about it. I have wonderful family, wonderful people, but we are survivors.
Okay.
We are survivors. So for me, I chose to go into social work partly because I wanted to better understand my own upbringing. I wanted to understand my mother's addiction. My parents divorced when I was 12. And as you know, 12 is traumatic anyway, right?
Absolutely.
The hormones hit, junior high. So I wanted to better understand some of the things that I had experienced. And then I started having children. I knew I wanted to be a social worker. And then I gave birth to a son who ended up being on the autism spectrum.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, I knew that I wanted to better understand this child. And so at that point, I went to graduate school and was able to get my master's degree in social work and get out there and practice social work. And I've done it a lot of different ways. There's a variety of things you can do as a social worker.
So in addition to talking about social work, we're going to get into autism. We'll do that a little bit later.
Okay.
But the social work aspect, the way you make it sound is, if you've experienced this yourself, you can help people a lot better.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I always tell my students that you cannot teach empathy in a classroom. Empathy is something that you learn from experience.
Absolutely.
So I also ask them the difference between sympathy and empathy. Do you know, Tom?
Well, sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Empathy is when you can relate to that sorry feeling.
Absolutely. You feel their pain. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So those of us who choose to go into social work are often individuals that have had a background of pain, and we've figured out how to deal with that, and we want to help others.
I had never thought about that. I've thought about the fact that social work is so important. It's very important. As a high school administrator and a middle school administrator, I know I work with the social workers because I needed them to help my students.
Absolutely. And that was one of my favorite jobs as a social worker, was a school social worker. Do you know what I did as a school social worker? My office was up, this was in Elko, Nevada, in the charter school up there.
Okay.
And they didn't have a place for a school social worker. And they just introduced the idea of even getting one. And so I was on this second floor landing, and you had to go up these narrow stairs, and it was basically a storage room. So
Wow.
I turned it into the tree house. And my office was the tree house, and I had, at the same time, I owned a business teaching domestic violence classes to court-ordered clients, and I rented space from some attorneys in town, and they happened to be redecorating, so they donated all of these fake trees to me. So my tree house had trees everywhere. I got little birds hanging from the branches, and it was great because I really feel like as a social worker, my #1 job is is to empower clients.
Yes.
And as a school social worker, you know how it is.
Yes.
Those little kids that, they don't really have a voice yet, and they need that empowerment, don't they?
Even with little kids, even as they grow up, to have a social worker there to sometimes let them know this is why you're having problems in this area or that area. I think
Absolutely.
it's so important to have that person that you can trust, that you can talk to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I wanted to set myself up as I didn't want it to be a negative stigma for them to go to the school counselor / social worker. I wanted it to be positive. So I introduced myself as Mrs. D. They never called me anything else.
Okay.
Mrs. D. And I told them I love knock-knock jokes.
Ah.
And I'll tell you, this was at the opening assembly, so I heard every knock-knock joke ever created by every first grader. It was so fun. But that kind of broke the ice. I always say that most people have some kind of a wall around them,
Yes.
so you have to find that loose brick. So that loosened the brick a little bit. And then having the tree house, where it was a privilege to come up there rather than something that you have to do if you got in trouble on the playground. And that was one of my favorite jobs as a social worker. I loved it.
I guess I can't say I used the social worker, but when I knew a kid was having some problems, and this is from high school, middle school, if I knew they were having problems, I'd let them know, look, you can go talk to the social worker.
Oh, absolutely.
And the social worker could confide in me. It wasn't something I was going to share with anyone else. And the kid, I'm not sure if the kid ever knew that the social worker was sharing anything with me, but I would never use that in any way for discipline or anything else. But it was just the idea that I could send that kid to somebody that they could trust.
Absolutely. And as a school social worker, it was not as much a heavy burden as just a wonderful opportunity, a wonderful privilege to get to be a part of kids' lives who really need someone to talk to. As a social worker, you get to be really creative. That's one of my favorite things about the job. And so as a school social worker, I would go into a classroom every day.
Okay.
And I would do a 15-minute spiel in one or two classrooms every single day. And the teachers loved it because they got a break. And
yes.
they got to be able to go to the bathroom or whatever.
Yep.
But the kids, it kind of opened me up to the kids where I wasn't a fearful figure for them. And I often, with my principal, good cop, bad cop, I got to be the good cop. So that was one of my favorite social work jobs. And I got to tell you, I kept a superhero cape in my office. And one of the things that I loved to do with the kids is when I knew that somebody had performed an act that was very, very positive, they did something kind.
Okay.
They reached out to somebody on the playground. They let someone in line in front of them or something like that. I would bring them into my office and put that superhero cape on them and let them know that they were doing a great job.
You know, as soon as you mentioned that, I thought about something that I did. Again, I think I was assistant principal at the time. And it was a program that I initiated. I thought I created it, but it sounds like you created it, and I just somehow got it by osmosis. But what I would do is it was called Caught You.
Caught You. I love it.
And the kids, they were caught picking up paper in the hall or something else. And I would get the names from either other students or from teachers, and we would name 5 students. 5 students a week or 5 students a day. I think it was 5 students a week. And then what we would do is allow them to leave 5 minutes early for lunch.
Wow.
And they thought that was fantastic. Didn't cost us anything.
Tom, you know what you were doing?
What's that?
You were using the strengths perspective. This is something that's unique to social work, and it's in my textbooks at Great Basin College.
Okay.
The strengths perspective is something all social workers should be using. And basically what we do is with individuals, with families, with groups, we seek to figure out what their strengths are.
Okay.
We don't rescue them. We empower them.
Well, one of the things I guess I noticed, I went from the high school to the middle school. And in the high school, we had the custodial people going through and cleaning up the high school. In the middle school, people would come over and ask, you have no paper in the hall or anything? No, the kids picked it up. And and because we had that program, the school was always clean.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought so.
Kids want to be caught doing good.
They
yeah.
do.
You know what? So do grown-ups. So do grown-ups.
We need to remember that.
And we all have strengths. It doesn't matter how dark your background is.
Okay.
There's a strength in there. There's good stuff going on. So that's what social workers do, is try to figure that out. We also use a systems approach. Do you know what that is?
What is the systems
The
approach?
systems approach is basically looking at individuals and their problems based on what's going on around them.
Okay.
So we want to take into account their communities, their cultures, the subcultures within the cultures.
Oh.
So not just society at large, but even every family has its own unique subculture. And so we want to take a look at all of those different systems. The way I explain it to my students is it's kind of like, have you ever seen those little Matryoshka dolls from Russia?
Oh, yes.
Where you have a doll and a doll and a doll.
Oh, yes.
So that very tiniest one, that is the individual.
Okay.
And then the systems are every
the others?
every subculture and culture and society at large all around them. So, you know, none of us are just islands, are we?
That's
We're
true.
all very, very interconnected. And so that's the approach that social workers use. And it's something that I teach every day.
This is fantastic. And I know you're enjoying it. And we have so much more that we're going to be talking to you about. But I want to ask one question before we go to the break. How long have you been in social work?
I had my first job in social work.
I know you're a teenager now.
No, it's been a while. It was in the mid-'80s, 1987.
Okay.
Was my first social work job. And I was just doing front desk receptionist work for a rehab center.
Wow.
But that's when I recognized the big difference between me and answering the crisis line and talking people out of hurting themselves and coming in. The difference between me and the person with the letters after their name was education.
And that'll do it every time. And we have to remember that. But at the same time, and we're going to be getting into a lot of that in our next session and the sessions after that. So the one thing I want you to remember is be sure to write down her name, write down her phone number, and if you need to contact her, that's what we're going to do. But come back and join us in the next session.